everybody! In this video, we're going to be going through the notes for lesson 2.1, which is about making a table to graph a line. Let's start by reviewing what it means to have an equation and a solution. When we have an equation, we can substitute a value for the input, which is x, in order to find the output, which is y. For example, if my equation says y equals 1/2 x minus 1, you'll notice that this equation has both an x and a y. I might ask you, if x is equal to 6, what is the value of y? In order to figure this out, we're going to use the same strategy that we used in Unit 1 when we learned to substitute a number. We're going to copy the original equation, but in the place in the equation where there is an x, we're just going to put a parentheses with nothing inside. Then we're going to fill in our x value that we were given. Now on our calculator, we're going to type this in. And when we do that, we should get the number 2. So now we know that y is equal to 2. This is the y value that we get by plugging in the x value that is 6. So the solution that we just found is 6, 2. Because when we write the solution, we always put the x first and the y second. Let's try that one more time. The next problem says, if x is equal to 7, what is the value of y? Again, the first step is to copy the original equation, but when you get to the x part of the equation, you're going to put a parentheses with nothing inside. Now we're going to fill in our x value, which is 7. On our calculator, we're going to type this in. So when we do that, we should get 2.5, and now we know that y is equal to 2.5. If we were to write that as a point, the x goes first, which is 7, and the y goes second, which we just calculated is 2.5. The next thing we're going to talk about is what do we do when instead of plugging in one number at a time, we want to know all of the solutions. In order to do that, we're going to need a graph. If we want to see all of the solutions, we're going to need to make a graph of the equation. On a graph, there are 2 rules. Solutions, so points that are solutions, are going to be on the line. And points that are not solutions will not be on the line. Let's look and see if these 2 points that we found are on the line or not on the line. This first point right here, 6, 2, is located right here on the graph. You'll notice that that point is on the line. So in a way, we can double check to make sure that we got the correct solution because it is on the line. This point right here, 7, 2.5, would be right here on the graph paper. And again, that point is on the line. So we can see with our eyes that these points that we found are indeed solutions. What we're going to do next is talk about 2 ways of seeing if a point is or is not a solution. One way uses algebra, and the other way uses the graph. Let's start with this point. I'm asking you, is this point a solution or not? The first way to answer that question is to use algebra. Now, in order to use algebra, we're going to focus on the numbers. In this solution, the -6 is the x number, and the -4 is the y number. What we're going to do is we're going to copy this equation just like we did before, but we're going to put a parentheses in the x spot and in the y spot. We're going to put parentheses for both. So instead of writing y equals, we're going to write parentheses equals 1/2, and then instead of writing x, we're going to put parentheses -1. Then we're going to fill in the x and the y numbers from the point into their corresponding parentheses. So the -6 is going to go in the x spot, and the -4 is going to go in the y spot. Now we're going to look at each side of this equation separately. The left side, the only number that's there is a -4. So I'm just going to copy it down. I don't need to write the parentheses because there's no other numbers around that. On the right side, I can see that there's an entire expression here. So I'm going to use my calculator and I'm going to type that in. When I do, I get -4. Now you'll notice the left side of the equation gives us the same result as the right side. So we can see, because those are equal, that this really is a solution. So we would say that this is a solution. And we used algebra to figure that out. Now we could have used the graph instead. It's not always possible to use the graph, and we'll look at an example of that in a minute, but this time we can. If I want to use the graph to figure this out, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at my graph, and I'm going to go to the point -6, -4, and see if that point is on the line. I can see from this graph that it is on the line. So I would say that this point is a solution because it is on the line. Now the next problem, unfortunately, has a little typo. So do me a favor, and before we start, let's cross out the negative and the negative. I apologize. Now in this point, the x is the 6 and the y is the 4. So if I wanted to use algebra to see whether or not that point is a solution, the first thing I'm going to do is copy the equation, but instead of the x or instead of the y, I'm going to put an empty parentheses in that spot. So parentheses, 1/2, parentheses, and then -1. Now I'm going to fill in my x and my y. My x goes here, and my y goes here in their corresponding spots. Again, I'm going to look at the left side of this equation separately from the right side. On the left side, there's no number there except for the 4. So I'm just going to write down the number 4. On the right side, I'm going to type this into my calculator. And when I do that, I get the number 2. Since 4 does not equal 2, I'm going to draw an X here. This did not work. And I'm going to say that this point is not a solution. And I used algebra to explain my thinking by showing my work here. Now another way to do the same thing is again on the graph paper. If I go to the graph and I go to the point 6, 4, 6, 4 is right here. You can see that that point is not on the line. So because of that, we would say that this is not a solution because the point is not on the line. Now, what if I gave you a different graph? We've got this graph here, we've got this equation, and I said to you, let's make a list of 3 points that you know for sure are solutions. What you're going to do is just look for some nice points on the line, not any in-between numbers. You want to look for some points that are right on the corners of the boxes. So when I do that, I can see that this first point is the point 1, 3. So I know for sure that that's a solution. This next point is the point 2, 1. So again, I know for sure that that's a solution. This next point is the point 3, -1. So again, I know for sure that that's a solution. You could keep going. There are several more nice points on the corners of the boxes here, but we're going to stop with 3. Now, if I also asked you to make a list of 3 points that you know for sure are not solutions, you're just going to randomly pick points that are not on the line. For example, I might pick this one, which is -4, 4. I might pick this one, which is -3, -2. And I might pick this one, which is 1, -3. Now, you might pick 3 totally different points from me, and that's okay. We're going to have different answers for a problem like number 2 because there are so many options. For number 3, is the point -10, 20 a solution? If I go to where x is -10, you can see that that would be way over here somewhere. It's off the graph paper. So using the graph to answer this question is not an option. We're going to have to use algebra. If my x is -10 and my y is 20, what I'm going to do is copy this equation over here. But whenever I get to the y, I'm going to put a parentheses, and the x is going to have a parentheses. So I'm going to have parentheses equals 3 minus 2 parentheses, and then the x is going to go right here, and then -1 parentheses. Now I'm going to fill in my y number, which is 20, and my x number, which is -10. Once again, I'm going to look at the left side separate from the right side. On the left side, it's just the number 20. On the right side, I'm going to type this straight into my calculator. Now you're going to notice there's 2 parentheses in a row right here, so make sure you catch them both when you practice typing this in. When I do that, I get 25. I'm going to draw an X because 20 does not equal 25. So I'm going to say that this point is not a solution. Let's try that one more time. Again, the point 18, -31 is not on this grid paper. So we're going to need to use algebra to figure it out. My X is 18 and my Y is -31. So I'm going to put a parentheses where the Y is, and then an equals, and then 3 minus 2 parentheses. I'm going to have a parentheses where the X goes, and then a -1. I'm going to fill in my -31 in the Y spot, and I'm going to fill in my +18 in the X spot. Now on the left side, it's just a -31, but on the right side, there's a whole expression here, so I'm going to use my calculator. When I do that, I should get -31. So these really are equal, which means I'm going to say that this is a solution. We have one last thing to talk about today. The last thing that we need to talk about is making graphs of the lines for ourselves. In the last 2 examples, I made the graph of the lines for you. But this time, you're going to have to make it for yourself. So in order to do that, here are the steps you're going to follow. First, you're going to choose X values. Your X values go on the left side of the table, and here's the numbers that you're always going to use. -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. You never have to think about that part because it's always the same numbers every time. The second thing you're going to do is substitute in order to find the Y values. So we need to figure out the Y. We're going to take this equation and we're going to copy the whole thing down, but in the spot where there's an X, we're going to put a parentheses. Now, unlike the last few examples, we're not going to put a parentheses by the Y. We don't have a number to fill in there. We only have a number to fill in for the X. So I'm going to write Y equals 2 minus 3 and then parentheses. And inside of the parentheses, I'm going to fill in the -2. Now, when I type this into my calculator, I should get 8. So the first point that I'm going to graph is going to be -2, 8. Let's try that again. I'm going to write y equals 2 minus 3 and then parentheses, and I'm going to fill in the -1. When I type this into my calculator, I'm going to get 5. So the next point that I'm going to graph is going to be -1, 5. Let's do it again. Y equals 2 minus 3 and then parentheses 0. I'm going to type this into my calculator and I'm going to get y equals 2. So the next point that I'm going to graph is 0, 2. The next one is going to say y equals 2 minus 3 and then parentheses 1. I'm going to type this into my calculator and I'm going to get -1. So the next point that I'm going to graph is 1, -1. And then the last number that I need to plug in is the 2. I'm going to type this into my calculator and I'm going to get -4. So I'm going to graph 2, -4. Now if I add those points to my graph paper, it's going to look like this: -2, 8, -1, 5, 0, 2, 1, -1, and 2, -4. You'll notice that when you go to draw your straight line, all of these points line up perfectly in a straight line, which is a great way to double check yourself. All of the points should line up in a straight line. Let's try that one more time. If I want to graph y equals 3x minus 1, I'm going to start by choosing my x's. And my x's are always going to be -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. My equation is y equals 3, and then instead of the x, I'm going to put a parentheses -1. In that parentheses, I'm going to fill in my x, which is -2. When I type this into my calculator, I get -7. So the first point that I'm going to graph is -2, -7. Next, I'm going to copy the equation again, but instead of the x, I'm going to put a parentheses, and then I'm going to fill in my number. When I type this into my calculator, I get y equals -4. So my next point that I'm going to graph is -1, -4. Next, I have y equals 3 parentheses and then -4. I'm going to fill in the 0. And then 3 times 0 minus 1 is -1. So I get 0, -1. Next, I'm going to have y equals 3 and then parentheses -1. And in that parentheses, I'm going to put 1. I'm going to type this into my calculator and I get 2. So my next point is 1, 2. And then we're almost done. Last but not least, y equals 3 and then parentheses 2 minus 1. I'm going to type this into my calculator and I get 5. So I get 2, 5 as my next point. I'm going to add these points to my graph paper. So -2, -7, -1, -4, 0, -1, 1, 2, 2, 5. Then I'm going to draw my line through those points. Now it should make a perfectly straight line. If it doesn't, something went wrong. And you should go double check your work. Last but not least, is the point 3, 8 a solution? I'm going to go look at this graph paper. 3, 8 is right here, which means it's right on top of the line. So I would say yes, because it is on top of the line. Now, if I ask you about -3, -6, -3, -6 would be right here, and it is not on the line. So I would say no, because it is not on the line. All right, that's it for today's notes. Thanks for watching. Please start your practice.